asshole neighbor, you ruined my life. When I was about 12 or 13, my mom and dad owned a tow trucking company. This particular day, they went into our neighboring state, so I had a few friends over and we were there alone. They probably came over at about noon. We were doing normal kid stuff, watching movies, eating junk food, so on. It was winter, so it started to get dark pretty fast. We were expecting my mom and dad to come home at around 6 or 7. A little before my mom and dad were supposed to be home, there's a knock on my door. My mom is known for kind of being stuck in the 80s. She always wore a leather jacket. One of my friends here, named Tina, looks through the window of the door and says, "It's your mom, I see her jacket." I jump up immediately and look through the window. It's pretty dark at this time and I don't see my father's tow truck. I run to the front door, screaming to Tina, "Don't answer the door, that's not my mom." But it was too late. She opens the door and here comes this 6-foot, 250-pound man with a black stocking over his face, running through our door. All of my friends ran out of the living room to the kitchen where the back door is located and ran away. Me, on the other hand, I obviously learned that day my fight, flight, or freeze was to freeze. This man grabs a hold of me and picks me up in the air. I was so terrified. The memory is so foggy of the event, but I managed to escape his grasp. I ran out the back door and down the block to a neighbor's house. They called the cops, and not long after, there were 6 cop cars, 3 on each end of the block. Come to find out, it was my grown-ass neighbor. He was allegedly playing a trick on a bunch of little girls. He was always a creep. I'm 26 now. To this day, whenever there is a knock on my door, I creep around my house so that people can't hear me, can't see me, and I hide until they're gone. Psycho neighbor. Several years ago, we bought a house with a little creek running through the backyard. Who wouldn't want a house in such a tranquil setting? The 3rd day we owned our new home, our next door neighbor came over to introduce herself. "Hey, my name is Ima." She greeted us cheerfully. We had an odd conversation, and when she left, my husband and I looked at each other and asked, what was that all about? The afternoon, I joked to him, "I can't believe I just moved next door to someone with plastic flowers in our yard. I'm an avid gardener." The next morning, we got up, all the plastic flowers were gone. It was a Twilight Zone moment. Whether I was gardening in the backyard or front yard, Ima was soon outside striking up a conversation. She had a way of making statements that catch you off guard and beg for a reply. She managed to get a lot of personal information from me before I figured out what she was doing. Ima had several dogs, and their barking was a nuisance. Every night, no matter what time we went to bed, the dogs would start barking under our bedroom window within a minute of turning the lights out. It took us months to figure out that she was watching for our lights to go out. How creepy is that? We politely asked her to keep her dogs away from our bedroom window late at night. She put a huge grin on her face and said, "Nope, can't do that." Then the barking got worse and worse, and she stepped up the harassment several notches. I would either be polite or just put down my gardening tools and go in the house. Even though I never saw her watching me, she had ways of letting me know that she saw everything I did. I felt like I was being stalked. She never bothered my husband, and my husband didn't believe me when I told him the things she was doing and saying to me. One day I took my husband's car somewhere, and Ima assumed I was home alone. She started with the harassment and creepiness. When I got home, my husband was shaken. He never doubted me after that. We had a nice neighbor on the other side of us, and one day I asked her if she had ever had any problems with Ima. She unloaded stories of years of abuse. Oh, swell. What have we gotten ourselves into? We finally contacted animal control and filed a complaint about the barking. They asked us to keep a record of when the dog started and stopped barking. The result, They barked between 60 and 70 hours per week. After a couple of weeks, I didn't want to waste any more time keeping track of that. Ima wasn't happy about the dog complaint, and so her next move was to call 911 the night of February 13th. At 11:45 p.m., 2 police cruisers and 4 cops showed up at our door for a domestic violence call, courtesy of Ima. Happy Valentine's Day. Every few months, Ima would get the urge to call 911 and report me for harassing her, even though by this time I no longer spoke to her and went inside whenever she came outside. What we didn't know then was that Ima had a wheelchair, and after she called 911, she'd get in it before the police showed up. She'd tell the cop the sob story that she was a poor, old, handicapped senior citizen being brutally harassed by me. I'm 2 years younger than Ima. Yeah, I'm a senior citizen too. Then the cop would come over to our house to chew me out for being such a horrible neighbor. Since my hair isn't gray, thanks to my hairdresser, I look much younger than Ima, so the cops assume she's much older and more vulnerable. After episodes of this, we installed covert video cameras. 2 months after getting the cameras, Ima had a hankering for the company of a uniformed officer. After hearing her sob story, he came to our house and told us to move away and stop harassing all the neighbors. To his credit, he agreed to view the video footage. The viewing left him speechless. Not only was there no wheelchair in sight, but everything she told him that I said or did to her, she had actually said and done to me. Shortly before we got the cameras, Ima tried to run me down with her car when I was out for a walk. When a friend of hers tried the same trick, we got it on camera. I didn't have to call 911 when that happened because Ima called 911 with a pack of lies. The officer that responded refused to look at the video footage. Oh well. From time to time, Ima parked her car in front of our house and just sat there and watched us. She'd take photos and video of us inside our house. She only did that once after we got the cameras. They're covert only to a point. If you zoom a camera in on them, you'll see them, and she toned down her act after that. Things were quiet for almost a year. Then one night, we heard a loud boom and the house shook. We peeked out the bedroom window and saw a couple of cars parked in front of Ima's house and a few people milling around her front yard. We got up and looked at the video footage. We saw Ima's son light something and throw it directly at our house toward our bedroom window. Then the explosion that shook the house. We called the police, but since there were no injuries or damage to the house, only burned up plants in the yard, they wouldn't even file a report. A few days later, we met with a realtor. Mysterious, aggressive neighbor. We moved a lot when I was a kid, but through high school I always used the same bus stop. It was about a half a block away, where our quiet suburban street intersected with a slightly busier one. I was often there alone, early in the morning. For the longest time, the most interesting thing that happened was a raven scolding me from a tree, or that a family of deer would follow me from the park, across the street from my house, to the bus stop, through the fog, and past me to walk into the forest preserve. It was a quiet neighborhood, and only a handful of cars might pass while I waited for the bus. The deer stopped following me after the harassment began. That morning, a Jeep suddenly hit the brakes and slowed to a stop in front of me. The driver had all of the windows rolled down, even though it was a chilly, wet autumn morning, one of those days where the mist just clings to and saturates everything, and the clouds are so low in the sky that you feel like the world is just a big room that you're in. Because of the fog, they hadn't seen me until they were a few meters away, and their braking made a screeching sound. They stopped the car, and the driver just sat there, staring straight ahead. I couldn't make them out. They were wearing a light gray hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses. I didn't see anyone else in the car. After about 30 tense seconds, during which my bemusement gave way to concern that someone was going to hit this guy. Stopped in the road, he finally turned to me, yelled a racial slur, smiled, and took off. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was newish to the area. I'm not great with faces, and I figured it was one of the kids at the high school trying to be edgy. Or maybe just a local asshole who had mistaken my ethnic background. Either way, I didn't think about it at all until the next week, when it happened again. This time, the guy had friends with him. The windows were tinted, and they only cracked them so I couldn't see them. He yelled a different slur at me, and I could hear their laughter as they drove off. This continued to happen, sometimes twice in a week, sometimes going months in between. I sounded young, so I continued to write it off as another weird local hazing ritual, but gradually it began to get under my skin. There were two things that bothered me about it. First, the slurs. They were ugly and hateful, and they sounded promisingly violent to me. Second, their license plate was obscured every time. This is a very wealthy area I'm describing, and the local law enforcement wouldn't call out anyone who lived there on a violation. So I wasn't surprised that they got away with it, but it did give me a pause. One morning I was ready to yell back at them, but instead of yelling anything, they just swerved at me on the sidewalk. I jumped out of the way and ran behind a fence, but the Jeep ended up whipping through where I had been standing before speeding off. I figured the kid had overshot and hadn't actually meant to hurt me, but some of the things that followed have since made me wonder. One morning, I came up to the bus stop, and there was just blood all over the area where I usually stood. It was wet for the rain, but otherwise congealing, turning dark in places. But I knew what it was. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was off-putting. A few days later, there was a dead animal there, mangled and brutalized. It wasn't roadkill. I couldn't take my eyes off of it, even after getting on the bus. It wasn't there when I returned in the afternoon. It wasn't an accident, I feel certain. It looked to me as though it had been stabbed repeatedly. Extreme overkill. I started to see the Jeep outside of the morning bus stop, but the windows were never down now, and it always sped off when I looked at it, or I otherwise couldn't get to it before it left. This carried on for years. One day in the summer, I was walking through my neighborhood with a friend, and the Jeep came by at a very high speed, and an egg hit me in the chest. It flowed down my shirt and onto my pants, and all I could think to do was turn to my friend James and say, "You saw that, right?" Because until then, nobody else had ever witnessed the events, and my family members seemed skeptical when I mentioned it. I had to go home and change my clothes and take a shower. It was then that I took it all more seriously. I had a bruise from that egg for weeks. I started to catch a ride with my brother in the mornings, or wait behind the fence until I heard the bus coming down the street. I didn't ever go outside until I had text confirmation that my ride was there. If I heard a car coming on a walk, I would run off into the bushes. They swerved at me a few more times, and then I never saw them again. Some other stranger things happened, and I've had stalkers since, but I've never been able to connect them to these events, nor figure out who the people in the Jeep were or where they lived. My parents have moved to a different part of the community now, but I'm still jumpy when I walk around in that area.